Hello listeners, if you've enjoyed these narrations, please click on that like and subscribe button. The lead detective of our department retired, and I was his replacement. Our department served a small town, only a few thousand people, so only I inherited one cold case of a missing woman. Since it was over 20 years old, all the leads had been thoroughly picked over. As I dug into the case, I soon found out that there was a very likely suspect in the case. He was seen giving her a ride the same day she disappeared. Aside from him admitting he gave her a ride, there was no other proof of foul play on his part. Late, he was arrested for killing 2 other women exactly like the missing girl. Over 20 years he admitted nothing about their cases. Everyone in the town knew it had been him who did something to the missing Mary. 2 days after the lead detective retired, the man died of a heart attack in prison. The entire situation was simply unfair. She was so like his other victims. It wasn't likely he just dropped her off and somewhere unharmed. He also hinted at having more victims buried, but now it was impossible to know. The bastard took it to his grave. I still went over the case, desperately trying to dig up anything I could. I was working long hours and arrived before anyone else, and I was still there when they left and the night crew came in. I had taken a break by the coffee machine to pour my 5th cup of coffee that night when I heard 2 of the janitors talking. I was only half paying attention, not wanting to listen in to their affairs, but something they said made me want to eavesdrop. Rose, the older cleaner, had taken his wife to a man who had known around town to be a psychic. Rumor has it he was able to talk to the dead. Rose's mother-in-law had just passed away. They went to him for some sort of information, and the man ended up digging up the entire Side family no one knew about. His mother-in-law had given up a baby for adoption before his wife was born, and not a soul knew until the psychic started to dig. However, he did not claim to come by the information with the powers people assumed he had. He simply stated he was just really good at digging up dirt on people. He did not want payment and refused to call up the spirit of the deceased mother, claiming any further information would just bring harm to the family. The janitors moved away from me and started to work. For the next few days, the idea rattled inside my head. I hated how the thought rotted away inside my brain. I was trying to justify going to a complete stranger for help on the case. I wanted to show him what was available to the public and keep it unofficial. It was like hiring a private investigator. I hated how many good reasons my mind came up with, even though he was a man claiming to have special powers. Or at least didn't do a good job quelling the rumors, saying he did. Legally, getting his help was a big gray area. I kept telling myself this was a bad idea, but that next Saturday, I found myself getting his name and driving to his place out of town. It was just outside the town surrounded by cornfields. It was the middle of summer, so the corns had just started to grow. His house was an old farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been updated in the last 100 years. I wondered if it had even had indoor plumbing. I walked onto the wooden porch, it creaking the entire time. I knocked on the door a few times. An old beaten-up car was in the driveway, but that didn't mean he was home. The car didn't look like it could even run. "Hello, Mr. Hart?" I called out and knocked again. I thought I heard a faint clunking noise coming from the back. There was a big backyard, so maybe he owned chickens. I could check behind the house, then leave. After all, I didn't actually think he would be of any help to me. I just wanted to get rid of that thought invading my work effort. "Mr. Hart," I called out once again when I was halfway to the back.
"Come around back. I'm too busy to meet you."
A man's voice called out to me. I did as he told me. I was right about the chickens. He must have had 100 of them roaming around. They were impressive looking coops lined up behind the house. Each coop with its own theme. One looked like a dollhouse and another looked like a courthouse. Clearly, someone put some time into building them. A tall man was working away, measuring wood, starting on building another house for his pets. I mean, they had to be his pets. I didn't think someone who put this much time, money, and energy into such complex and impressive structures would kill the chickens he spoiled. They must be for eggs only. The man I was looking for had his back turned to me, hunched over a board of wood he was measuring for a new house. By the look of it, he was trying to make a mini castle. A chicken sat on the table he was working on, overlooking his progress. He straightened up to address me, and I saw just how tall and thin he was. His black hair was long and tied back out of his face. Dirt covered him from his long day of work. His clothing was meant for chores based on the holes and faded coloring of his jeans and button-down shirt. He looked pretty normal until he turned around, and my eyes were met by a pair of red ones.
They're colored contacts.
He explained when he saw my surprised expression.
Can I help you, Mr.?
He was looking me over, trying to figure out if we had ever met before, or if he was expecting me. I wanted to call ahead of time, but found it impossible to find his number. I'm Detective Charles Moore. I was hoping. That was all I could get out, before finding myself with a face full of angry feathers. For some baffling reason, he'd thrown the chicken that he was sitting on the table right into my face. It fluttered and lost feathers trying to get back onto the ground safely. He tried to run from me, only to trip over his own tools, falling flat on his face. On reflex, my body moved. In under 10 seconds, he was handcuffed on the ground. I had no reason to handcuff him, aside from the face full of chicken. If he was running from me, then I wanted to at least know why. Did you seriously toss a chicken at me? I asked as I helped him to sit up.
No comment.
If I uncuff you, are you going to do it again?
No comment.
He said more harshly, sticking his nose up. You should at least apologize for the fucking chicken. He ignored me for a few seconds, then very softly said a small sorry Betty to the poor bird. This was a waste of time. I didn't know why I bothered even coming here. Why did you try to run? Is there something illegal over here? I didn't expect him to answer, but saw the gears turning in his head.
It's a reflex around cops. I ran with a bad crowd, but I'm out of that now. And I'm growing a certain plant. Only one for myself, so you can see why a detective randomly showing up freaked me out.
That was a fair answer. I honestly didn't care about any kinds of illegal growing operation, as bad as that is to admit. I knew of at least 5 people in town that had a big operation going on. This guy would have made it on that list to watch if he had anything like that on his property, and I was currently in the wrong here. I handcuffed him for, in a way, assaulting an officer. I also just arrived onto his land and could be treated as trespassing. I considered freeing him, but the shifty look on his face and chickens within arm reach made me reconsider.
So why did you come over here? You heard rumors I lived up to my last name?
He smiled and I dismissed him. I heard you could talk to the dead. I don't believe in that stuff. You're apparently good at finding things out, though. I was hoping you could look over a few case details and see if anything jumped out at you. He looked offended, even though I was giving him some praise. I really couldn't get a read on this guy.
I don't talk to the dead. I'm a necromancer. It's different. And unless this case is very interesting, and I don't have time for playing gumshoe.
Well, this was a wasted trip. This guy's clearly got issues. Calling himself a necromancer, as in raising skeletons and zombies from the grave. I was more offended by the idea that he had thrown a chicken in my face. "Alright, I'll just leave you alone then," I replied very quickly, wanting to get out of there.
You don't believe I'm a necromancer, do you? I can prove it. Just go with me on this. It'll only take a few minutes, and all you need to do is hand me that wooden box.
I looked between him and the small box he was nodding towards. I thought he might be crazy and had some sort of weapon inside. I would check in the box before handing it to him. I didn't want this to be a wasted trip, so I decided to humor him. I took a peek inside to see a dead chicken tucked inside, surrounded by wild flowers. He then stood up and traded the box for my handcuffs. I looked at him confused on how he could get out of them. I still had the key in my pocket. I was certain I closed the cuffs so tight, not even his thin wrist could slip free.
Not my first time being cuffed,
he said with a wink that made me take a step away from him, wanting some distance. I watched him as he placed the box down on the hard-packed dirt. The lid coming off and was put aside. He suddenly looked focused as he drew very impressive, perfect circles around the box in the dirt.
I know you're thinking I'm sorta a crazy, handsome bachelor, so I rarely get to show off my skills. Rats got a hold of this poor girl earlier today. Working with fresh corpse costs less sacrifices to make move. For this, I already have everything I need. A corpse, body of someone who murdered the one I'm raising, and some magic words. Since you're here and watching, you need to say the words as well.
What words? Like Alakazam? I really should have left by now. I was absolutely not going to say that. Although, I was impressed by the show he was making of it. With his fingers, he'd drawn more symbols and strange writing in the dirt. Inside the box under the flowers, he pulled a dead rat to place outside the box. It was all very much looking like a ritual that could raise the dead. He impressed me with his artistic skills enough to stay and see where he was going with this. Within a few short minutes, he drew a complex system of symbols around the wooden box. I would let him say his magic words, then ditch. Arms crossed, I watched him still on the ground in front of the box, speaking in a language I didn't even have the faintest idea of. It sounded a little bit fake, honestly. He wasn't being overly dramatic, as I expected him to be, though. I even humored him enough to say the very embarrassing childish words, although very softly after he glared at me, when I did not repeat them the first time. After it was all said and done, I thought the circle and symbols glowed very faintly. I assumed it was just a trick of light. When nothing happened, I was already ready to leave. I took one step and froze. The chicken in the box twitched. Its body started to spasm for a few seconds before going still. I wondered what kind of trick this was. If he drugged the poor thing to make it appear dead, I might have taken him in for animal cruelty. I watched as it sat up and clumsily fell out into the small coffin. On unsteady feet, the chicken started to take a few steps around, dead eyes seeing nothing. Listen, I don't know what you gave it to make it look this rough, but please, just put that thing out of its misery. Clearly, this whole thing was some sort of scam. Dead things just don't get back up and start walking around. He either drugged it or trained a blind, injured chicken.
BB, the second, please show him the neat trick I taught you.
I felt disgusted just being there. I needed him to listen and know just how much I disliked this chicken torture. Listen, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I tripped on my own feet and fell back into the hard floor. And the chicken in front of me, that looked very much dead, started to turn its head around. Entirely around. I heard a disgusting, cracking noise coming from the thing as its head did a 360 spin and just kept slowly spinning. I knew owls could turn their head like that, but I don't think chickens could. And even if they could, I doubted they could just keep twisting their neck around, again and again. Its neck started to look like a twisted rag, and it still didn't stop. I felt like I was about to be sick at the sight. I looked over at the strange man, expecting some sort of explanation. Instead, he just looked back at me, with an expression on his face like a proud child showing off an art project, expecting a gold star. I just couldn't believe this man brought it back from the dead, even with the proof still spinning right in front of my face. For the next hour, he did everything possible to prove the chicken was real, dead and moving. I finally had to accept what I was seeing. Thousands of questions ran through my head, too many to ask at once. The strange man beat me to asking the first question though.
What about the case did you come here for?
I wanted you to try and dig up some dirt on a cold missing person case. The man who we think is most likely to have kidnapped Miss Mary died in prison. I explained, sitting in the dirt, completely shocked.
Oh, where is he buried?
I only stayed a few minutes before he asked such an ominous question. We made plans to meet up the next night to go grave digging. I could look up where the suspect had been buried, and he wanted to finish the new chicken coop before we started a new job. While I was driving home, I did think about how insane this whole thing was. I couldn't believe I not only let myself go over to his place, but had been talking into another meeting. Backing out was not an option. I did not want to commit a crime or disrespect the dead. I also didn't want the family of the poor missing girl to not know her fate for much longer either. After all, I was only going to dig up a dead body with a necromancer. What was the worst that could happen? I arrived first at our arranged meeting spot, dressed in a dark clothing and a shovel in my trunk. I felt like an idiot. For the 1000th time, I questioned myself what the hell I had gotten into. As time passed, and no necromancer, I was starting to get annoyed. I almost gave up on the whole thing before I heard a car struggling to get down the road. So the beat-up car of his could actually run. Being a necromancer and all, I guessed he could bring all sorts of things back from the dead. Seeing his iced coffee, I was even more annoyed he didn't value my time in the slightest. Follow behind me in your car if you can even make it. I know where he's buried. It's only an hour drive, I told him. I had gotten out of my car earlier to pace angrily around waiting for him to show up.
Go, right now. We haven't even discussed payment for this job yet,
he said with a loud drink from a straw. Mr. Hot. I was so angry I could kill him.
As much as I love being called Hot, I actually go by Neff.
I really was going to end up killing him if he kept on like this. Neff, then. I know you're offering a service I'm fairly certain no one else can. However, don't you think closure for these families is payment enough?
You can't eat closure. How about something simple? Dinner and a movie? Me and you. Nice steak place and a rom-com after?
I'm married, I lied.
She doesn't need to know.
And I have kids. An even bigger lie.
I love kids.
I could barely stand being there talking with him. Spending a meal together would be impossible. That smug grin of his looking so fake on his face, it was off-putting. I had a feeling he was trying his best to appear aloof and flirty. But for what reason? It was easy to see he didn't really want to go out. He just said it would be annoying. Why make me dislike him this much? If you do this and we can get some leads, I'll go to the movies with you. An action one. And there must be a seat between us.
Buy me a tub of popcorn and you have yourself a date. Let's go, and let's take your car.
I didn't even have a chance to back out or stop him from grabbing a hefty duffel bag from his back seat and then climbing into the passenger seat of my car. He even honked the horn when I didn't follow after him fast enough. I just stared, trying to collect myself so I wouldn't deck him while driving. It was pitch black when we arrived. I had a vague idea of where the grave would be. I couldn't see anything but Neff walking around just fine in the dark. Risking a flashlight would not be a good idea in case any security saw us. I just needed to trust him that he could find the grave in the dark. It took a while before we stopped at a small mark bearing the name of the dead man. I was carrying 2 shovels and held out one to Neff. He didn't take it.
Necromancers never do their own digging.
There was no sense arguing with him. I wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as I could. Wasting time trying to get him to do something he adamantly refused to was not something I came here to do. I soon found out that digging was actually pretty hard work. I took off my coat and rolled up my sleeves, the cool night air chilling my sweat, making me hot and cool at the same time. If someone came across us now, I would not be able to talk myself out of it. I was digging a grave to steal a body. No way to get out around that fact. Neff acted as a lookout. I suspected he mostly sat on the tombstone, munching on some sort of snack he brought along. He didn't offer to share any. I did not let myself think about what I was doing. In my mind, I was just digging. I hadn't accepted the fact that there was going to be a corpse at the end of this task. A refusal to acknowledge that fact kept me going. My arms felt sore, and my hands shook from the effort. The skin on my palms felt raw from the work. Only stopping for a few times, I had dug for hours. Morning may arrive before I finish. Exhausted from the effort, I froze when my shovel hit wood. The realization of what I was doing finally struck in after the hollow noise. I was digging a grave. I was standing above a dead body, about to steal it, because I was convinced Neff could resurrect it. Neff picked that moment to nearly give me a heart attack by jumping into the grave next to me. The grave below us gave a groaning sound, threatening to crack from our combined weight.
You're done. I can lift this out.
Neff was a thin man. Until that moment, I hadn't thought of how we would remove the coffin. I'd assumed he would just do what we needed to, and the zombie he created would crawl out of the grave. Whatever the plan was, I didn't actually know it. I just listened to him. Shortly, I found out why the coffin needed to be removed. The hole was just deep enough for us to be difficult for me to lift myself out. If I couldn't do it, then I had no idea how a zombie could have the strength to crawl out of its own grave. After a few minutes of struggling, Neff gave me a hand by pushing me up out of the grave. Taking a well-deserved break, I sat in the grass waiting to see how Neff would manage getting himself and the coffin out. It turned out to be very easy. Lifting the coffin up and over the top of the grave, he slid it onto the grass as if it weighed nothing. In one swift, graceful movement, he was out and brushing himself off. His arms were much thinner than mine, and he looked like he could barely support himself on his legs, let alone lift anything remotely heavy. How did you just... I asked, a little bit dumbfounded.
You like what you see?
Neff replied, posing, not missing a beat. Then he got serious. At least as serious as I've ever seen him. Opening up his duffel bag, he started to reach around inside, pulling out a strange assortment of items. Risking some light, I turned on the flashlight to see what he was doing. When Neff became focused, he was fast, wasting no movements. It was like he did this routine 100 times before. First, he adjusted the coffin, placing in a spot where he had enough room to work. Using a large bottle with a spout, he poured pure white sand in a circle. From where I was sitting, the circle looked perfect. I wondered how much practice it took to be able to make such a perfect circle every time. Around the circle he made more of those strange writings, but only one line around. I thought raising a human would be more complicated than a chicken. Those symbols you're writing, They look a little bit like those from a cartoon my nephew watches. The main character's missing an arm, I think. I commented, remembering back to a quick glance at the show I've seen.
It's called anime, shut up.
I stayed silent and watched him work. From his bag, he produced dried flowers, too many to have reasonably fit inside the bag. Ripping the coffin open with one hand, he started to arrange the flowers around the body. I couldn't bring myself to look inside. Digging up a body and looking at it are two totally different things. I expected there to be candles and chanting, maybe some chicken sacrifice. There was none of it, just Neff writing some more strange things on the coffin in chalk. For some reason, he took some dirt from the grave and placed it inside of a jar. I wasn't sure if it was for now or later. Out from inside his bag came the last two items, a bracelet made of what looked like to be threads of silver, and a polished wooden board with a small matching wooden hammer. Facing away from me, he stood straight and began speaking in some ancient language. He spoke for a few sentences, ending the ritual off with knocking 3 times against the wooden board. I sat holding my breath, waiting to see what would happen. No lightning or dramatic flashing. Nothing extraordinary happened, aside from a dead man sitting up in his coffin. The sight nearly made me sick. Turning away, I needed to collect myself. Being a convicted killer, I wondered if anyone paid to have him embalmed, or if he was just tossed in the cheapest coffin and then just put in the cemetery owned by the government. The image of his half-rotted corpse trying to get out of the coffin made me chill to my very core. The wind blew, and the smell in my direction made me retch. I'll admit, I wasn't doing as well as I thought I would be. I just wanted to get some answers and get out of that damned place. While I was averting my eyes, Neff put some car air fresheners on wherever he could hang them on the corpse. The mixture of those two smells made it worse. Can you just ask him about the victim so we can get the hell out of here? I nearly begged, like hunching over almost to get sick.
What? Ask him? Does this thing look like it's able to talk?
I could kill him. The shovel was so close. A few good swings would be all it took. What do you mean he can't talk? What was the point of us doing all of this if he can't talk? I was on the verge of becoming hysterical.
Did you really think that I could bring back the dead to the point where they're talking and looking all shiny and new? Alright, I am that talented, but it takes a great amount of sacrifices you do not want to make. And even if we went down that route to making him able to speak, he literally took his crimes to the grave. I make rotting flesh move, not bringing people back to life. 'Cause I'm so talented, I'm able to cheat death and get bits of information that rightfully should have died with him. Instead of telling me where he buried his victims, I'm connecting directly into his past emotions and memories. I can't point to a map telling you who was buried where, but instead it's like a homing pigeon, you know? Instinctively, I know which direction to go find them.
I collapsed in the grass, dirt and tired, trying to figure out how Neff was getting at. He could still find the victims. Who knows how many there were out there? I'd wished in that moment I asked more questions about how this whole thing worked beforehand, so I could be more prepared for it. I let my eyes drift over to the corpse stumbling around. He was such a bastard in life, harming women and making the family suffer by never revealing their resting place. At least now there was a chance for that. So now what? You just walk around pointing me in the right direction? I asked, sounding tired.
I prefer to drive.
I sat in the grass thinking as I saw that the sky was starting to lighten. We had to grab our zombie and leave soon. I didn't even think about if we still refilled the grave before we should leave. I just wanted to shower and go to bed. You're not making any of this up right. Like, this thing could talk, but you're just making us do this long method so you can hang around longer. Neff let out an offended gasp in my comment.
Never been so insulted in my life. There is no truth in that thought at all. I'm certainly not keeping you around, hoping I have future chances of accidentally touching your butt,
he said with fake offense. I really needed a shower. I stood up, brushing myself off the best I could. A horrible thought came to me. Does this mean we have to take him with us? I asked, looking over at the rancid, smelling, stumbling corpse. Neff smiled and nodded, and I groaned at the fact I'd never get that smell out of my car. It took some frantic planning on my part to get things arranged. After dropping Neff back at his car and watching him drive off with our new zombie, I started on getting some time off work. We had no idea how many undiscovered victims there were out there, or how long it would take us to find them. They could be all local, or even all across the country. I was able to get a week off work, even though I was new lead detective in the department. But even with such an important job title, it wasn't as if I could just get as much time as I wanted. I arranged that I would pick up my Necromancer and the zombie at the same place earlier the next day. It should give me a lot of time to think and get well rested for our strange road trip ahead. I made a mistake within the first few hours of getting started on our body retrieval road trip. I used my credit card to get gas. Neff went inside to purchase even more snacks for the road, while I stayed over by the pumps. Neff was tall and thin, and who knew where he put all the food he ate. When he found out I used my card instead of cash, I definitely got an earful for that. As much as I didn't appreciate being treated like a child, I did agree with him on this point. I acted without any forethought. This trip was unofficial. No one knew what we were doing. If it came out that we found a body near where I bought gas, it may be very suspicious. I could not leave a trail or any connection to the case.
Do you have anyone in this area that you could visit as an excuse of why you're traveling, though?
Neff asked between eating handfuls of chips. My brother lives near here, but we should really get going, I protested.
Yeah, go see him, and I'll drop you off and pick you up later tonight.
But
it's not like the bodies are going anywhere,
Neff pointed out. Again, he made a very good point. Somehow, our plan of finding poor victims buried somewhere turned into some family time. I didn't get to see my brother or nephew very often. I just got busy with work and other adult things. He looked surprised when I showed up at his door, asking to stay around for the day, but glad for the time that we got to see. My nephew was getting older. He nearly was half my height now. I remember him being up to my knees the last time I came around. I swore after this case I would come by more often. To my surprise, I was the cool uncle and needed to start living up to that title. After dinner, Neff came by to pick me up as he promised. I said goodbye to my family, trying to avoid questions of who Neff was and why he was driving my car around. Thank God we kept the zombie in the trunk. I could never explain my way out of that one. Overall, it was a pleasant trip before we got into the dark business of uncovering murder victims. Because we lost our entire day, Neff said we would drive through the night. We could stay awake for 3 days straight if need be. It was either a Necromancer thing or all the sugar from the snacks he ate. Sleeping next to him was something I was not keen on at all. He non-stop flirted and attempted any kind of pickup lines he could think of that would land. If I slept, he could turn off into a dark, empty road to do God knows what to me. He noticed how hard I was trying to stay awake as the night wore on. Turning his weird music off, he glanced over at me. When night fell, He takes off his glasses, red eyes showing. I didn't ask again, but I wasn't sure if those were actually colored contacts.
I'm not gonna do anything to you while you sleep. I like a challenge, and a sleeping target is no fun. We'll be hiking into the woods to find some bodies, so you need to make sure you get some rest.
I really wanted to trust him. I still felt like it wasn't entirely safe though. No matter how I felt, I wasn't going to be able to stay awake forever. I finally gave in, praying he would keep his word. Pulling my jacket over my shoulders, I adjusted my seat, trying to stretch out a little to attempt to get some sleep. I suddenly envied my brother's talent for napping anywhere. Maybe when you become a parent, you just gain that skill. My eyes were closed for what felt like hours, but it must have only been for a few minutes. I drifted between half asleep and half awake, doubting I would actually get any rest on this trip unless we stopped and rented a room. I was about to sit up to adjust myself when I sensed some movement. I heard Neff's clothes rustling, and I listened to him shift in his seat. Keeping my eyes closed, I felt him carefully take my jacket and pull it up after it shifted down during the night. Again, I wondered why he went out of his way to be flirty and annoying when he might actually be a decent kind of guy. We drove, and I just had to trust he knew where we were going, only stopping for restroom breaks and food. We finally arrived to a hiking trail through some woods I didn't recognize the name of. With no one around, Neff let the zombie out of the trunk and dressed him up with the sun hat and sunglasses, trying his best to make him look alive at a distance. My sense of smell adjusted to the rot, but I could still notice a hint of it in the air. If anyone came close, they would know for certain something was dead. We needed to avoid people at all costs on this trip. I started up the entrance of the trail. I couldn't stand smelling or even looking at the zombie, so I decided to wait for them to join me. We walked along the trail with Neff leading the way, Zombie taking up the rear. Soon, we went off trail into the woods. It was easy to get lost here, so I really hoped that Neff actually knew the way. It was hot under the noon sun. Even in the shade of the trees, it was scalding. I was sweating by the time we stopped in a clearing. Neff didn't look like the heat bothered him in the slightest, though.
There, under that tree, a woman is buried. Being so close, I'm able to dig into his memories. He thinks her name is Jenny. You don't want to know how she was killed.
Neff told me, never taking his eyes off of the tree before us. Yellow wild flowers grew at the base of the tree. Someone had scratched an X in the bark years ago. It was faint, but I could still see it. I guess the murderer marked the tree in case he needed to dig up the body for some reason. Alright, let's contact the local department and get them out here, I said, trying to keep the sweat out of my eyes. Neff looked at me then. Even with the sunglasses covering most of his face, I could tell he looked disappointed in me.
Moore, you're so handsome, but so dumb at the same time.
Neff reached out and took my face with both hands, as if keeping my head still would make his point sink in deeper. I pulled my face away, annoyed. We had a body right in front of us. Why wouldn't we just contact the local police department to come and find her? What's your plan then? Raise her from the dead and walk her over to the cops? I asked, letting my annoyance seep into my voice.
No, that would be even dumber. Listen. How are you going to get the cops over here? Call and say that there's a body under this tree? Do you really think they would drop everything to come out here? And let's say they do listen. They are going to find the person who called in the tip.
Neff explained. Yes, all of that was true, but we came this far. What were we going to do? We needed to somehow make the police aware of this poor girl. Alright, what's your plan then? I asked, wanting to know if Neff had a way to solve our problem. A bright light suddenly blinded me when I looked back at him. When he didn't answer for a moment, I looked at the unmarked grave decorated with flowers. When my head turned back, a flash and a click of a camera made me stumble back. When my eyesight returned, Neff was holding a Polaroid camera in his hand. He was shaking the photo he'd just taken of my startled face. His duffel bag was hanging from his shoulder, so he must have gotten the camera from there.
We uncover her, take a photo, and send it into the cops along with the location written on the back of the photo as proof.
He told me, hiding the photo he'd taken of me away before I could snatch it. What about our fingerprints? I asked him, following his line of thoughts.
I don't have any. This film was purchased before you were born, and the record's lost in a fire. They're not going to track down where I am or where it came from.
Well, what about handwriting then? They can figure out things based on that. I was a detective, but I will admit, a very green one. I hadn't been on many cases aside from simple robberies and drug busts. I only assisted in one murder before. I hate to admit it, but Neff might know more about my line of work. He silently took a notebook out from his backpack with a ballpoint pen. After a few minutes, he lifted the book up to let me see what he was writing. In block letters that looked as if they were typed on a computer was, "I like your butt." I punched his shoulder. He proved his point. If I didn't watch him write it, I would have assumed it came from a printer. With all that settled, the only thing left was to dig. The zombie that followed behind us was holding a shovel. I hadn't looked at his direction until that point. The Necromancer thought of this plan way more than I did. I was certain this wasn't Neff's first time tracking down bodies. Taking the shovel, I went over to the marked tree, and I tried to avoid digging up as few flowers as possible. I was sure to be slow and careful. There was no telling how far down she was buried. The last thing I wanted to do was actually damage her body. The entire thing just felt wrong. It was just so wrong. I was digging up a dead body, a poor victim that had loved ones, family waiting on her. I wasn't doing it the proper way. I feared my meddling may ruin chances of officers gathering evidence of who killed her. Then again, if we didn't do this, she may never be found. The day wore on as I dug slowly. I was drenched in sweat and needed to accept a bottle of water from the zombie by this point. Neff was just resting under the tree. His sunglasses on, it appeared he was sleeping. Necromancers never dug their own graves after all. After hours of work, I was in mid-swing of the shovel when I heard his voice.
Stop!
I froze, looking up to see Neff looking down at me. He reached over, taking the back of my shirt and lifting me out of the small hole on the grass. I had forgotten how strong this beanpole of a man was. He carefully got into the grave I dug, crouching down and starting to brush the dirt away. My breath caught when he took a hold of some brown fabric, the same color as the dirt, and pulled it away, showing a dirty skull. We'd found her. I suddenly felt faint. It was either from the heat or being in front of a dead innocent victim. I swayed on my feet and felt a set of hands guide me to sit down. I really expected Neff to take the moment of weakness to cop a feel. Quite the opposite, in fact. He allowed me to sit and collect myself. I took small sips of water, listening to the wind through the trees and birds chirping away. I needed to focus on anything but what we were uncovering. A snap of a camera brought me back to life. I finally looked down into the shallow grave and at the exposed skull. Fallen strands of hair surrounding it. After getting a photo, Neff covered the skull again with the fabric, but we both knew we would not fill her grave back in. I couldn't handle the thought of her being buried in a place a second time. How are we going to send the photo? I asked, voice choking. My strength was gone from the day and our discovery. I was thankful I had someone to help me deal with this, even if it was a person like Neff. As if answering my question, he whistled. A short whistle, like he was calling a dog. For a few seconds, I only heard the normal sound of the forest around me. The cackling of crows sounded normal, until a large burst of wind and sounds of wings came into clarity. With a deafening cawing from large crows, much larger than dogs, they appeared to land on Neff's outstretched arm.
This is Kara. She's a good girl. Normally, humans can't even see her, let alone interact with her. She can go into the police station and place the photo in the lead detective's desk. Simple as that. No traces to connect it to us.
Neff explained. He pulled some jerky from his bag and gave it to the large bird, who greedily devoured it. He then held out the photo, and she carefully took it into her beak. He gave her a kiss on the head, and the large creature was off to finish her task. I looked up to see more oversized crows sitting in trees, looking down at us. Are they like familiars or something? I asked, looking at 3 others staring down at us.
What? I'm not a witch. They're just crows I raised. They are Kara, Karen, Camille, and Carl.
He said, pointing at each crow, one at a time. Let me guess. Carl is spelt with a K, I asked. Neff smiled at me.
Actually, it is.
I don't know if it was because of the heat, or maybe the digging, or possibly the shock of finding a forgotten victim, or perhaps maybe a mixture of all those things that made me laugh. But a small snort of a giggle came out. A stupid sounding thing. I really hate to admit it, but I think in that moment, we both found ourselves laughing at the same thing. We became friends. Or at least, much friendlier than before. By the time we got back to the cars, I was filthy. I bet I smelled almost as bad as the zombie we had following us around. Our car was never going to recover from this trip. Neff suggested we rent a cheap room for a few hours. He hinted it could be for other things, but I really needed to clean up. I refused his advances, but agreed on getting a room so I could shower. We had found one girl out of an unknown number of them. Mary, the one who started me down this rabbit hole, was still out there somewhere. Even if I had to quit my job, I swore that I would find her. We only stayed at the small rundown motel for a few hours. Neff paid, and I wondered how he had that much money. I doubted necromancy was a well-paying job when he did gigs like this for dinner dates. Fearing his answer, I didn't even ask. I just got cleaned up and a little rested and ready to get going. While I took a nap, Neff went out with my car. He informed me he had saw some fresh roadkill that he had to collect. As long as he didn't put it in the back seat of my car, I didn't really care too much. The trunk, already a lost cause, smelling like death. Before the sun was rising, we left. Hot on the trail of our second victim, my hopes were high that day. Hiking through the woods, we found a grave in front of a fallen log a few hours after sunrise. It was already getting hot, and I'd gotten a few bug bites from my troubles, but I still kept at it and started to dig. The digging didn't last very long. I was only a few feet deep when Neff stopped me. I moved away, letting him get down on his knees to sift through the dirt with his long, thin fingers. Finally, he brought up a piece of bone I assumed to be her rib. My heart dropped. Again, I was not thinking ahead. I didn't know what we would do if the body was in pieces. This was the forest after all. Any sort of animals could have gotten to her before us. Plus, she had been buried for over 20 years. It was a miracle we found her body at all in such a good condition. Neff kept looking through the dirt. He only found a few more pieces of bone though. Only enough to fit in one hand. Not enough to identify who she was though. Can our zombie find the rest of her maybe? I asked, sitting on the rotting log, watching Neff stand up with a small amount of bone fragments in his hand.
No, he can only bring us to where he buried her.
What about you then? Can you sense death or dead bodies? Something like that? I asked hopefully. It seemed like Neff could sense whenever I was just about to uncover some bone. So maybe he knew a spell or something that could track whatever remained of her.
I can, but I can't find her. She's been scattered throughout the woods and eaten by animals. Such small pieces are hard to sense without the other traces of death being around. A dead deer would be a bigger source of death and would overpower her bones if they were close by. I'm afraid this is all we're going to find of her.
He explained using a rare, serious tone. But, I said, standing up, desperate to try and think of anything else. I couldn't accept we were so close, and yet wasn't able to give closure to her loved ones. Isn't there anything we can use? Magic or supernatural tracking dogs? What about your crows? I pleaded. He just shook his head, then looked over at me as if an idea had came to him.
Dogs? Well, actually, if they were in the area, I think this could work. I'm not promising anything though. If I call in a favor, I could get us a better chance of finding more pieces of this girl. Again, no promises. I'm not saying we'll find enough for DNA or something like that, but it's worth a shot. Also, it's gonna cost you.
I was hot and tired and didn't feel like dealing with him. Whatever the cost was, it would be worth finding out whose those bone fragments belonged to.
You need to put out on the first date,
Neff said quickly. Absolutely not, I shot back with no hesitation.
Fine, a goodnight kiss.
Not on your life.
Come on, let me put my hand on your thigh during a movie.
I'll hold your hand while walking into the theater, but we're still watching the movie with a seat between us.
Deal!
If we didn't end this trip soon, I was either going to kill him or myself. Getting out of the woods was a bit hard, with some families deciding to take a hike. They smelled our zombie trailing behind us. I feared someone would go off the trail looking for the source. Neff guided us out of the woods, off the trail and away from the people. We ended up a bit of a walk away from where we parked. By the end of the day, I was again covered in dirt, sweat, and bug bites. I wasn't the type for off-trail hikes and was completely exhausted by the end of the day. Neff had to stay in the area to try and track down the person he thought would help us find the rest of the bone fragments. He didn't tell me much about them, and honestly I didn't ask. He dropped me off at the motel, one that looked even worse than the last one. Still, I gotten cleaned up and ate some fast food we picked along the way. I was so tired, I fell asleep on top of the blankets on the stiff motel bed. I had my cell phone on the bedside table in case Neff needed me for something. The curtains were cheap and nearly transparent. The red light of the neon motel sign poured through into the room. In the dead of night, and after a few hours of falling asleep, I thought I heard Neff's voice outside my room. I opened my eyes, still drowsy and head heavy. I thought I heard him greeting someone outside. I figured it would be best to go and see what was going on, so I sat up to start moving when a shadow came across the window, blocking out the light. Something was just outside my room. A massive frame took up almost the entire window. It looked human enough as it walked past, but I saw something trailing behind. Something that looked a lot like a tail. What the hell kind of monster did Neff know? Or was this thing something Neff was friendly with? Was it after us? Did it smell the zombie and thought it was a meal? It was very dumb, but in my half-asleep state, I worried about the Necromancer outside. I was only human and didn't even bring my gun along. I would be useless. Still, my body moved as I ran to the door, bursting out, looking over, trying to see the monster just outside my room. I heard Neff saying my name, sounding confused, and I remember seeing a simple eye symbol. Then I was flat on my back, the world spinning, my body feeling like 1,000 pounds, until I blacked out. I had no idea how much time passed until I felt myself being lifted into a sitting position and something cool being placed against my forehead. My senses slowly returned to me as my hand reached up to touch a cold can of soda before pressing above my eyebrow. I heard Neff talking, but not what he was saying. I shook my head trying to get my head clear. What happened? I asked, feeling well enough to open my eyes to see I was still out front of my motel room.
I was calling you handsome and stupid again. Seeing a wolf that does not want to be seen as dangerous.
He explained. A wolf? I asked slowly as another memory came back. Yeah, I had seen a wolf face, a snout poking out from the fabric over the face with the eye symbol painted on it. But it was tall, very tall, in a human shape. I shook my head again, not wanting to believe I might have seen something that looked a hell of a lot like a werewolf.
Valak is a nomad spellcaster. He's the one I asked over here to deal with our scattered bone problem. Like Kara, humans can't see him or interact with him unless he wants it. Come on. You need to stand up. You just got slammed by a spell. He panicked and knocked you out. If you don't walk it off, bro, you're gonna be in a coma for months.
Neff helped me stand on shaking legs, my entire body protesting against it. Everything started to spin, but the idea of giving into the urge to sleep and not waking up for months kept me going. Neff sounded like a decent person for once. He let me rest my head against his shoulder. I was in such a bad state, he could slip a hand anywhere, and I would not have noticed. I suspected he did just that, as he grabbed me around the waist, making me just one step forward before I puked. If I could focus on anything but getting sick, I would be embarrassed over him being so close and having his hands on me. Can he help? I asked, hoping talking would keep me focused.
In a way, because of what he is, Valak can cast spells and make charms in a way that costs less energy and sacrifices. I could cast a spell to find some more bones, but it's cheaper to ask him. Anyway, how to explain the spell? Are you gonna puke? Because if you are, get it over with.
We made some progress walking. I tried to pull away from him to take a few steps on my own, but the movement nearly made me sick again. I just had to accept another man clinging to me until my head cleared up. I'm fine, go on, I lied.
Alright, now where was I? Right, the spell. It's a formatted love spell. Instead of an increased chance of finding your true love, we scrapped it and turned it into an increased chance of finding bone fragments in the woods. We decided to cast it on the sheriff of this area. Then, Valak is going to cause havoc in the woods. The sheriff shows up and finds some bone fragments. It's out of our hands from there. The spell only increases the odds of finding the fragments by so much, and we can't cast the same spell twice. Even with magic, there is only but so much you can do.
By the time we reached the office, I was feeling much better and could support myself again. I pulled away from Neff, but didn't trust walking on my own just yet. I felt like I had the world's worst hangover, and got hit by a truck all at the same time. Still, I had enough sense to realize Neff was doing a lot for me. He used his connections and went well out of his way to find parts of a woman he didn't care about. And for what? Hanging out with someone who really didn't want to hang out with him? How was this all worth it for him? Thank you for what you're doing, I said, pressing the cool can of soda against my forehead again, hoping it would help.
A kiss would be better,
he said, crossing his arms. Yeah, sure, whatever. I felt so sick in the moment, I really didn't care. I doubted I would even remember half of that night if I could recover from whatever Valak hit me with. Neff's face lit up, taking me completely serious. I felt both his hands grab my shoulders. The dumbass actually was trying to take advantage of me. I almost felt bad for him, because the movement of him suddenly grabbing me shook my head so badly. I lost my dinner all over the front of his shirt. Neither of us spoke as he helped me get back to my room while covered in my dinner. I think he helped me get cleaned up a little, but my memory's a little hazy, at best after puking all over him. I woke up the next day wearing a new shirt with the same jeans as the night before. I still felt like utter garbage, but could manage getting out of bed. When I saw Neff at the car, he didn't speak to me. He just got into the driver's side ready to get moving to find the next body. I was perfectly alright with the silent treatment and never wanted to talk about what happened to the night before. We set forth in silence in search for the next body. On a road trip finding murder victims, only stopping for a few hours at awful hotels and eating greasy fast food is not my idea of a vacation. In order to take some time off from my job, I faked a family emergency and then dipped into my vacation time. My boss called to check up on me, asking if everything was alright and if I was enjoying some time off. I wasn't officially on the case and couldn't tell him I was driving around with an honest-to-God necromancer, telling my boss some lies to get him off the phone as I met back up with Neff. He was shoving a mountain of burgers into his face. I can barely stomach greasy fries at this point, let alone a full meal. He must have a stomach of steel. We found the next gravesite, but ran into some troubles immediately. It was along a very popular hiking and camping area. The woods had a steady stream of people along the entrance. Neff vaguely knew where the body was buried, but needed the zombie to guide him to the right spot. Well, with the zombie, a walking dead body, we can't exactly just walk in the middle of an inhabited area. He looked in rough shape and smelled horrible from spending days in a hot car trunk. We couldn't risk anyone seeing, let alone smelling him. We had to come back to the woods at night. Once we found the gravesite, we can stash the zombie in the trunk and away from any unsuspecting campers from stumbling on our undead guide. We followed the plan and found the site in the dark. It looked just like a normal clearing in the woods, apart from a large X spray painted on a rock. I shuddered when my flashlight beam shone on it. I knew there was a body buried there. Even after getting tangled up with the Necromancer, seeing a zombie walking around and uncovering some bones, I still got a chill thinking about the dead waiting to be found. My stomach was tied up in knots, and it was not from my terrible diet for the past few days. Neff left me in the clearing alone to clear the site as he took the zombie back to the car. I had about an hour or so until sunrise. We needed to find the site at night, but Neff didn't want to dig just yet in case I didn't see what I was going for and damage the body with my shovel. This was not the proper process, but we should really do our best to limit the damage to the crime scene. I waited in the dark woods, skin crawling, listening to the sounds around me. Even normal forest sounds could be threatening when you were alone in the dark near a grave. I just wanted the sun to come up and us to finish our task to get the hell out of here. That's when I heard the sounds of twigs snapping, and it made me jump. I shone my flashlight over trying to see if Neff was the one making the sound. I was positive I heard the sound and wasn't just being paranoid. I was hearing someone walking around in the trees. Mentally, I chided myself. We were in an area with people camping. Someone might have left their tent to go for a washroom run, and I could be scaring them just as much as they're scaring me. My hands started to sweat as I kept moving my flashlight around, trying to see who was walking just beyond the trees. Soon, the footsteps stopped. My heart was beating so loud, I thought it was going to burst. I sensed something behind me. It was hard to explain, but I didn't hear anything. I just knew that something was now at my back. Turning on my heel so fast I nearly twisted it, I looked at a large rock behind me. Now sitting on top, above the large painted X, was something that nearly made me turn and run. A small object looking like a stick, made of what I assumed to be small bones, tied to a star that was also made of bones. I had seen the Blair Witch and knew stickmen charms was bad news. Taking one step back, without removing my eyes off the thing, I started going towards the edge of the clearing. Strong hands grabbed my shoulders from behind, and I screamed very similarly to a little frightened girl, and dropped my flashlight as I swung around, trying to get free of those hands. A loud cackling laugh frightened me more until I recognized it. Neff was behind me, doubling over in laughter so hard he sounded like he was choking. I felt my face turn red in the dark. Unable to control my rage, I started to kick at his shins, expressing how I felt about him sneaking up behind me and grabbing me like that. He dodged only to trip over his own feet, falling to the ground, still cackling. He could choke to death on his own laughter for all I cared. "You're a complete ass," I hissed at him. I walked over to the rock, grabbing the stick man and tossing it at him. "Shit like this? Man, this isn't funny." I was fuming. It took him a while, but he finally recovered enough to sit up with the charm in his hand. He rubbed at his eyes, looking at the stick man.
Valak was here. He told me you finished our request and wanted to leave you a gift as an apology for nearly killing you. He's really shy, so when you almost saw him, he kind of panicked.
Shy? That massive, terrifying wolf creature was shy? I took back the charm, looking it over. It may be a gift, but it still gave me the creeps. "What is this for?" I asked, looking at the creepy thing.
It's a good luck charm. It absorbs all your bad luck, and after a few days, you should burn it, and it'll burn away all the bad luck you took in. If you wait too long, however, the charm might take in too much, and it'll break, spilling all that bad luck onto you.
Neff explained. I turned it over in my hand, wondering what made Valak think I needed such a thing. I couldn't help but feel I was already lucky. I stumbled into someone who was already close to these cold cases and was willing to help me out. I tucked the charm away, reminding myself to burn it tomorrow night. "Neff, why are you here? You've invested so much time and energy into this. Finding these girls is my job. But for you," I asked. We still had plenty of time until sunrise and until we could start digging. I couldn't help but ask a question that had been bothering me for a while.
Oh, you're my type.
"No, seriously, Neff." He looked at me in the dim flashlight beam. He had his sunglasses off, and I could see his red eyes looking off into the distance, trying to decide on something. He finally looked back at me with an expression on his face I couldn't place.
Ah, you showed up at a good time. I've got nothing going on right now. The gate's closed, the deep creatures are peacefully asleep, and I'm not needed to keep the world balanced. I used up a lot of my strength recently, and I'm pretty weak right now. I should be resting though, considering how easy it would be to kill me. I guess I'm just tired of dealing with the end of the world stuff. Doing a simple job with some nice eye candy isn't bad, every once in a while.
I would let the eye candy comment go because I could tell it was him being honest with me. I also knew if I pressed him, asking him about any of these things he mentioned, I wouldn't get an actual answer. Anything called the deep creatures is well beyond my pay grade. The end of the world stuff was not for me. As the hours passed by, I tried asking him some other questions, attempting to get any more facts about himself. I was shot down, and Neff was done being honest and sharing. He was a bit of a mystery and wanted to stay like that. When the sun rose, I stopped talking and went straight into digging. Yet another grave. This one deeper than the others. I'd gotten a bit skilled at digging the past few days. Even though it was deeper, it didn't take me as long as I thought. I had barely started to warm up when Neff stopped me and did the process of looking in the dirt to find another skull looking back at us. He took the photo and called his large crow Carl this time. But he did not send Carl away. Instead, he looked over at me.
This is Mary, the girl from your case. I want to delay sending the photo to the local police, though, until we're done finding all these graves. Now, I have a feeling we only have one more after this. Her killer buried her with her own wallet. With that found, you'll be called in and unable to be free to find the last site.
Neff explained, his large bird perched on his arm flapping its wings to adjust itself. I nodded while looking over at where I'd just dug. I didn't want to leave her. It made me feel sick knowing she was going to be still in this ground and not brought home for a little while longer. But for the sake of another girl somewhere, I needed to leave Mary here alone. Just then I was starting to think I wasn't cut out for my job. I could handle being a detective in a small town where nothing happened. If working in a larger town, and this was my day-to-day life though, seeing bodies, I just couldn't do it. Neff told Carl to deliver the photo later, and he guided me back to the car. I was ready to sit down, get washed up and find the last site. I just wanted this to be over with. When Neff got to the car, he didn't get inside. Instead, he leaned against it looking over at the early birds arriving on the hiking trail.
I've held back some important information. With these sites being discovered, you'll hear the news soon. I didn't want you to be so extra stressed. You needed to be able to deal with what we're doing. And no offense, you're cute little country boy playing detective. I like that about you. So small and pure, acting like a tough grown man.
I punched his arm. It was a reflex at this point. Lay it on me. If I can handle being around you, I can handle whatever you're going to tell me.
The first grave site you dug up, there wasn't one body. There was 4.
Neff said in a low tone. My entire body prickled and felt cold, tears suddenly starting to sting my eyes when I blinked them away. 4 bodies. 4 girls buried away for that long. Neff was right. I felt sick and didn't want to do this or think about this anymore.
The site with the fragments was only one girl. It was a rush job, and that's why she was buried so poorly and an animal got to her. This site, however, has 6 bodies. Mary was not alone all these years.
I don't know how Neff could give me the news so coldly. He was talking about double-digit murder victims, but it sounded like he was just telling me the weather. I turned away from him, my stomach empty, but still felt like I was going to be sick. I hunched over, head down, hands on my knees, trying to understand why he just said 11 girls. So many loved ones hurt and waiting, all because of one evil man. And he was evil. I knew that for certain in that moment. I looked over in the direction of the truck and where we stored the walking corpse. I've never hated anything or anyone in my entire life until now. I hated that man for taking so many lives, for hurting so many people. I was glad he died. Someday, he would be forgotten, his name never to be repeated. I swore right then and there that I would never use his name to try and speed up the process of having time erase him from this world. When I felt better, I straightened up and looked behind me to see Neff with his arms open. He wiggled his fingers, beckoning me to go to him for an embrace. I ignored him and got into the car. One more site to go. Neff was right. It was harder going towards a grave when you knew how many bodies were waiting instead of just one. I refused to stay at a motel and wanted us to stay on the road and keep going. Neff could just have to deal with me being dirty for another day or so. Aside from bathroom breaks, we didn't stop. We drove into farm country. Corn and cow fields flew by. Both my cell phone and radio no longer having signal. We truly were in the middle of nowhere. A perfect place for forgotten bodies. Because there were so few people, we could take our zombie god out without any worries. I now had another reason to feel sick when I looked at him. The car got stuck a few times along a dirt and bumpy road until Neff finally parked and made us all get out. One last trip and one last sight. Neff could sense how I was feeling and wisely didn't attempt to flirt. In fact, he was acting a bit different than the past days. He gave me the silent treatment before after I puked on his shirt, but this was colder. He seemed tense. There was a chance the idea of finding so many victims were getting to him as well, I thought. He was carrying the shovel and I followed behind him. We found ourselves in an overgrown field. At some point in the past, the field looked to be part of some farmland before the owner just gave up on it. I reached for the shovel to start digging, but Neff walked out of my reach. He paced around finding a spot. To my shock, he started to dig. He refused so many times, it was a waste of breath to ask. And yet, there he was, completely focused on his task. The hot sun not bothering him as he shoveled away dirt in such a perfect pace. Giving him a day, and he might dig halfway to the earth's core. I let him work, not speaking to him, feeling as if this was something he needed to do. It didn't take long, but he uncovered a grave. A small bundle of fabric that made my throat close. It was so small. I feared to cut the victim up before burying her. Brushing away dirt, he revealed another small fabric bundle beside the first one, but it didn't uncover them. Neff just looked down with a strange expression on his face. He looked almost sad at what he was looking at. I wanted to get his attention, to make him look away from the sight, but no words could come to mind, no words flowing out of my mouth. There was really nothing I could say in that moment. Still, I opened my mouth to say his name when a loud crack rang through the air. I jumped at the sound as more rang off. I knew what gunshots were. Some sort of hunting rifle sounded close by. I grew up where hunting was common, so I knew what that sound was. I looked behind me trying to see where the first shot came from, then forced my eyes back at Neff, telling him to get out from the open. My heart stopped when I saw it was far too late. His sunglasses exploded from his face at the second shot that came. I was in such a state of shock seeing my friend collapse to the ground that I didn't even register that I was in danger as well. When my body did move, it was to make the stupidest choice of running to him. I should have left him and ran for cover. I should have grabbed the shovel for some sort of weapon. I should have done literally anything but run over to Neff to haul him into my arms to see his damaged face, spilling with blood all over my clothes. I just couldn't accept he was hurt. My mind just snapped, thinking if I could just get him out of there, everything would be fine. It was Neff after all. He could raise the dead. It was impossible a bullet, or even two, to the face would kill him. Hooking my arms under his now limp body, I tried to drag him away. Fast footsteps came running up behind me, and I was far too late to move out of the way as somebody hit me in the head hard from behind, hard enough to knock me out. I woke up, head pounding and feeling like a weight of 1,000 pounds. Everything hurt and felt too heavy to move. I've felt I had such pain before. For a few minutes the pain was so much I had forgotten about everything. Soon the horrible memories came rushing back. I jerked my head up to look around, shouting out Neff's name, trying to find him. My arms and legs were taped tightly to a chair. I struggled to get free while darting my heavy head around looking, trying to take in my surroundings. It looked like a run-down, old wooden chair. Signs of someone living there were scattered around. It smelled musty and old. In the dim light, my eyes landed on two figures on the floor. One was the zombie, now not moving and looking just as dead as when we first dug him up. The other was my friend. Dried blood over his face, his one eye completely destroyed, while the other staring over at me, and yet not seeing anything. "Neff, no!" My voice cracked as I yelled for him. I couldn't control myself or even think. I didn't care if the person who did all of this could hear me. I just needed to get the hell out of there and get to my friend. While I was struggling, I wasn't paying attention as a man entered the small room. He was dirty and looked homeless. Rifle over one shoulder, he came to me, swinging the butt of the gun into my face, scrambling my brain for a few seconds. "Who the hell are you two? And how did you find those bodies?" He yelled, sounding as stressed as I felt. My head was swimming. Nothing made sense. Who the hell was this guy? Why did he shoot at us? And why wasn't Neff just getting up and taking care of this? He wasn't human. He couldn't be. I know a bullet to the face couldn't kill him. It can't. I had to push the thoughts of my friend from my mind, at least for a few minutes, to figure out who this man was. He paced around looking strung out and on something. He was muttering to himself while looking over in my direction. Suddenly, the thought snapped in my brain. "Your dead partner told us," I replied, voice sounding hoarse. He froze, eyes wide in fear, and looked at the dead man we brought along, then back at me. For my answer, he punched me in the face again, starting to shake the chair. "The dead don't talk! Who the hell are you?" he screamed, his rancid breath nearly making me sick again. "It's the truth. That man you shot, he's a necromancer. He'll be back any second now, and he'll set you straight." I hoped to sound confident, or at least somewhat threatening. The man stopped shaking me. He stared at me, trying to see if I was lying or not. Slowly, he let me go and started towards Neff's body. To my horror, he took his rifle off his shoulder and shot Neff a few more times for good measure. I strained against the chair, but in my bonds they were too tight. "There. Now I'll ask you again before I kill you too. How did you find the bodies? I never told anyone, and he never told anyone about me. How did you know?" Tears coming to my eyes. I wanted to force them down and handle this. I was a grown man, for God's sake. I should be able to handle this. At least now I knew who this man was. At some point, him and the other killer joined up. It wasn't unheard of, and for some reason, when the one of them were caught, neither ratted each other out. The one man died in prison while the other was left to be free and continue killing. But I didn't understand how Neff didn't know about this man. Did he know and think the partner was dead already? Or moved on and wasn't a threat? He hinted before that he could see how the woman was murdered. If he had access to those kinds of memories, surely he would have seen if there was a second person. "I told you already. He's a necromancer." I was in poor state. Any kind of fight left in me had left, and I knew I was about to die. I couldn't get free, and my friend was surely dead. This man just needed to shoot me once and it was all over. Instead, he hit me again and again, this time breaking my nose, blood pouring down my face, but I refused to cry out in pain. "That's it. I'll just bury you along with those little girls you tried so hard to find and get the hell out of here." He sounded strangely calm as he leveled the rifle right in front of my face. At this distance, there was no question of him missing. I was a second away from death before a tremor hit the house. Everything shook and rattled while thunder sound came from outside. It made him drop his rifle in fear and look around. I've never been through an earthquake before and was very confused on what was just happening. As the shaking stopped, he went to pick up his weapon. Before his hand could reach it, his entire body was kicked away and well across the room, slamming hard against the wall. To my immense relief, Neff stood in front of my face, healed. I didn't question how he was alive or even what was happening. I was just glad he was alive and standing. He wasted no time tearing the tape away and getting me out of the chair. "Christ, Neff, do you have any idea how worried I was about you?" I snapped at him. I expected him to give me a flirty answer back, or, well, even look at me. But he kept his eyes cold in his task of freeing me. When I was standing, he took my chin roughly to look me over.
"Let me take care of this."
He didn't even sound like himself. Did the bullet do some damage to his brain after all? I let out a yell of surprise when he ripped my shirt open with one hand, keeping my head placed against his chin. I used all my strength trying to pry his hands off of me, but his grip was like a vice. "Neff, what the hell?" I demanded, to get no answers. I planted my feet down, but it didn't do anything. "Wait, we need to get this guy tied down, or something. He killed those girls along with the others. Neff, come on. Let's go back and deal with this." He kept dragging me along, not looking over at me. It scared me. Deep down, I felt like if I didn't get him to talk, something awful was going to happen. I was dragging along out of the rundown cabin into a grassy field, trying to dig my feet into the ground. He finally stopped a few feet out of the cabin. He let go of me, and my arm did not turn to face me.
"You are going to leave. Go back to your life. We never met. You have nothing to do with this, and I will deal with him in my own way."
Neff answered, his tone chilling my blood even while in the hot sun. Deep down, I knew what he meant by his own way. Neff wasn't human. That man wasn't just going to be killed. Neff could torture him in ways my mind couldn't even imagine. For what that bastard had done, I almost wanted to let him go through with it. But I hated how Neff was acting. This wasn't him. If he went down this road, he would lose a part of himself. I knew that much to be true. "Neff, we're taking him in so he can be judged for his crimes. I may not be a good detective, but I'm still a man of the law. I can't let you kill him," I said, sternly standing my ground. Neff looked over his shoulder at me. When his intimidating look didn't faze me, he finally turned to look down at me.
"More. That last grave was for children."
My hand shook and bile came to my throat. Those small fragment bundles weren't because of the bodies being cut up. I understood why Neff was so deeply angry. He also saw what those two did, and how many were in the grave. If anyone deserved to be tortured, that man did, but Neff didn't deserve to be the one to carry it out. I still have to follow the law, Neff. He needs to be in the court for... Suddenly, Neff snapped, his red eyes blazing. He felt taller, and the sun around us dimmed. His teeth became sharper, and his hands curled, looking like claws.
"I'm not human. I have seen his crimes, and I have judged him guilty. This man will be erased from history in the most painful way possible."
He didn't even sound human anymore. The person I considered to be a friend was becoming something else. Dark and threatening, he growled down at me, and I felt so small in that moment. Still, I need to get through to him somehow. "It's not your place. You can't take this away from the families of..." Again, he cut me off, his face twisted into something, and the ground started to rumble under my feet. His face grew so dark in the sudden lack of light around us, I could only see his red eyes and snarling mouth.
"Why should they get sense of closure when I never did? If I could not rip apart the men that violated my daughter, I shall tear apart any vile piece of shit I come across. That is what I'm owed. And I don't care if I'm taking that away from anyone else. And these men are getting exactly what they deserve, and I shall not stop until..."
The world was dark, shaking from his rage. I knew if he kept going, he would turn into something else. Dark shapes looking and almost like wings started to appear behind him. Neff was powerful, angry, and yet deeply scared. I pushed aside my fear of him. I reached out and pulled him close to me. The world and Neff returned to normal. The sun shone down again as I let him hide his face in my shoulder. "If you keep going like this, you won't be able to come back from it," I told him, hands shaking, but I still kept him on his back.
"You'll have to go on that date with me if we keep that guy alive and have him arrested."
His voice was muffled, and he was trying to get back to his normal, flirty tone. but it just sounded weak. I'll go the whole 9 yards for you if you would just keep from doing anything stupid. We both let out a weak laugh at my offer. Raising his head, he looked down at me. I really thought I'd gotten through to him, and we were just going to peacefully drag the murderer into the cabin to the local cops. A gunshot came from behind us. Neff pushed me aside and I tripped into the grass. The man was at the cabin door, trying to reload his rifle, but his fingers fumbling. I got up to grab Neff and get the hell out of from where I was standing, inside of an invisible wall separating us though. The man finally got his weapon loaded and fired again. The bullet exploded against the same wall I was banging my fist against, trying to get to my friend. Neff knew this wall was here the entire time. I don't know how or when he created it. No matter how hard I pushed, I couldn't get through. Neff turned to look at me with a hint of regret in his face. He already made his decision. Staying meant becoming a monster. And Neff decided he was staying. I could no longer talk him out of it. But I think he was glad that there was someone who cared about him enough to try. Turning away from me, his body twisted and turned dark. He moved too fast for me to get a good look at what he had become. Whatever he truly looked like, it was dark and sleek, and something no human should ever lay eyes on. The black shape blurred across the grass right towards the dirty man and his rifle. I heard screams as the shape dragged him inside of the cabin, and couldn't do a damn thing about it. I really should have left. After a few hours of trying to get past that damn invisible wall, I turned away to find that car. The sun set when I did find it. Being so exhausted, I just collapsed in the back seat. Neff left behind his mixed CD. The music stayed on for a little while, because it grew on me during the trip. When morning came, I found somewhere to get cleaned up, then drove back to that cabin. I parked the car down the road and waited, then repeated the process for the next 3 days. My boss may be trying to get in contact with me, but I didn't care at this point. The very least I could do is take a friend home. Near sunset on the 3rd day, Neff finally came out of the cabin. I would see him in the dim light where I parked. Getting out of the car, I waited for him to take the long walk down towards me. His clothes were torn and covered in dry blood that appeared as if he had tried to clean it. His hair no longer tied back, sunglasses lost. He lost so much weight in those few days. Weight he could not afford to lose. When he stopped a few steps away, he didn't even look up at me. Along with some pounds he lost something else in those 3 days. Something he could never regain. His humanity. Holding out a bottle of water for him, he took it in weak, trembling hands. We didn't leave. I just leaned against the car with him, looking at the colors of the sky changing. There were so many questions I wanted to ask. Not a single one felt right to ask, though.
I lost my daughter.
He said finally, after taking a few sips from his water. Adopted? I asked carefully.
What do you think? The men who did things to her died in an accident before I got to them. They didn't even feel any pain. They just died. How unfair is that? I was a human a long time ago. I became what I am because of that.
To bring her back?
No. Even then I knew she was never coming back. No matter how much you love someone, death is the end. They don't come back. You can bring back parts of them, hints of what was, but never that person. I couldn't bear seeing parts of her. It's like you find an object that belonged to your deceased loved one, and it just reminds you all over again that they're gone. No, not her. I wanted to bring back parts of the ones who harmed her and make them suffer. I thought even traces of the ones responsible for her death felt my wrath. I would feel something. Instead, I became this, as simple as that.
Again, I was at a loss for words. Nothing I said could help him at this point, no matter how much I wanted to. Come on, Neff. I'll take you home at least. The small gesture was enough for him. He gave me a hint of a smile and got inside the back seat of the car to curl up and sleep for the trip home. We didn't talk much on the way back. Just took turns driving when needed. It was a depressing trip back, to say the least. I knew a case would be ready to be closed when I got back. So many bodies were being found. They finally noticed the grave of the serial killer was robbed, so when I got back I needed to do my best to avert suspicion away from myself for that crime. I would have my hands full. Not at all what I thought I would be dealing with taking over the lead detective role in a sleepy small town. I dropped by Neff's place first. I didn't even check my phone. I knew it was full of messages telling me to get the hell back already. Neff got out and stretched. Neither of us knew how to say goodbye, or what even to say to each other after everything that had happened. So this time, I decided to break the first question. "Are you free next Friday?" I asked him finally.
I might be. Why do you ask?
He said with the same old playful manner coming back. "Let's go out. Dinner and a movie. Let's say 5? A fancy steak place and some rom-com or whatever, your pick. If you play your cards right, I may even put out on the first date." The last part was a lie we both knew. At least it got him to finally smile. I drove off, leaving him to his chickens, and with the promise to see each other again. I was right to assume I was going to be busy. Friday came, and Neff called my office. He knew I was too much on my plate, and we put off the date until things died down a little. A few months passed and I finally cleared a day. We called each other from time to time, but when I couldn't get in contact with him for a few weeks, a panic started to rise. I drove down to his place to check it out. His rusted, beat-up car remained in the driveway, but it was far too quiet at his place. I ran to the backyard to find it empty of chickens. Their coop still stood, clean as if never ever used. Not even knocking, I opened his unlocked door to start looking through the old farmhouse, and found nothing. Just a dusty, empty house with sparse furniture. It appeared as if no one had ever lived here for years. Maybe Neff never stayed there. He just dropped by and used the backyard for his failed chicken army. I kept looking for him though. Months turned into years. Access to information got better, but I still couldn't find any trace of my old friend. No matter how hard I looked, I knew if he didn't want to be found, I wouldn't come across him. But still, in the back of my mind, I felt that we would meet again. I owed him a date after all. I was positive that someday he would come by to collect on it.